The Dirlewanger Brigade. The criminals too evil for the SS. In August 1944, Himmler sent a battalion of SS military police to Warsaw, not to fight the Polish resistance, but to watch the Dirlewanger Brigade. He was afraid they might turn their weapons on other German units. When the SS thinks you're too violent, you've crossed a line most humans can't even imagine. The 36th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS started as an experiment. Hitler wanted to see if convicted poachers could hunt partisans the way they hunted deer. So in 1940, 80 prisoners were pulled from concentration camps and handed weapons. Their commander was Oskar Dirlewanger, a convicted child rapist, violent alcoholic, and man. Historians have called perhaps Nazi Germany's most extreme executioner. The experiment worked too well. The unit quickly expanded beyond poachers, murderers, rapists, the criminally insane, men pulled straight from mental institutions. By 1943, only 10 to 15% were actual SS personnel. The rest were the worst criminals the Reich could find. Their preferred tactic in Belarus was simple: herd an entire village into a barn, set it on fire, and machine gun anyone who escaped the flames. Historian Timothy Snyder calculated that while inflicting their first 15,000 casualties, the Dirlewanger unit lost only 92 men, many of them, he noted, to friendly fire and alcoholic accidents. That ratio was only possible because the victims were unarmed civilians. In Warsaw, the horror reached its peak. During the Wola massacre, Dirlewanger's men killed between 40,000 and 50,000 civilians in under 2 weeks. They murdered 500 children at a daycare center with bayonets and rifle butts. They gang-raped Red Cross nurses, then hung them upside down and shot them in the stomach. Witnesses reported soldiers practicing cesarean sections with bayonets on pregnant women. One eyewitness, Belgian sapper Matthias Schenk, described watching Dirlewanger personally rip a newborn from its mother's arms and throw the infant into a burning pile of rubble, then shoot the mother as she screamed. The unit's total death toll is staggering. Between 30,000 and 120,000 civilians in Belarus alone, plus 200 villages burned to ash. In Warsaw, another 30,000 to 50,000 dead. Dirlewanger was captured after the war by French forces. The official report said he died of natural causes. His cellmate said otherwise. Polish guards beat him to death over the course of several nights. No one mourned. The Soviet Penal Battalions. Death sentence in uniform. We thought it would be better than a prison camp. We didn't realize at the time that it was just a death sentence. Those were the words of Ivan Gorin, one of the few men to survive a Soviet Shtrafbat. The penal battalions created by Stalin's order number. 227 in July 1942. The order was simple: not one step back. Deserters, cowards, soldiers who retreated without authorization, officers who lost battles, all were sentenced to the Shtrafbats. So were political prisoners, common criminals, and anyone else the state deemed expendable. Their mission was to atone for their crimes against the motherland with their own blood. That phrase was not metaphorical. From September 1942 to May 1945, 422,700 men were sentenced to penal units. Very few survived the war. Penal battalions were assigned the most suicidal missions: breaking through fortified German defenses, reconnaissance and force patrols to determine enemy strength, and serving as sacrificial rearguards during retreats. Some accounts describe Strafniki being sent into battle wearing dark clothing instead of snow camouflage, deliberate targets to draw enemy fire away from regular Red Army units. Behind them stood the NKVD blocking detachments. SMERSH, the anti-retreat troops. In the first 3 months after Order Number 227, blocking detachments shot 1,000 penal soldiers and sent nearly 25,000 more to the battalions. A report to NKVD Chief Lavrenti Beria noted that by October 1941, his troops had detained 657,364 retreating or deserting personnel. Of those, 10,201 were sentenced to death by court-martial. The term of service in a penal battalion ranged from 1 to 3 months. 3 months was reserved for men who would otherwise face execution. If you survived that long or suffered a serious wound, you could be rehabilitated and returned to a regular unit. Most never got the chance. At the Battle for Musta Tunturi in October 1944, the 614th Penal Company, 750 men strong, attacked German fortifications from the Barents Sea. They climbed sheer cliffs through barbed wire under machine gun fire. Approximately 70% died. 3 soldiers threw themselves onto machine guns to save their comrades. The Germans feared the Shtrafniki because men with nothing to lose fight like demons. They had no future to protect. Only the present moment, and the chance to die with some shred of dignity restored. The 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte, Hitler's bodyguard turned killers. The Leibstandarte started as 120 men guarding Adolf Hitler's person. By 1945, they had murdered an estimated 5,000 prisoners of war and earned a reputation as the most fanatical fighting force on either front. The 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte SS, Adolf Hitler, was exactly what its name implied: Hitler's personal army. Founded in 1933 by Sepp Dietrich, a former butcher with no formal military training but absolute loyalty to the Führer, the unit grew from a bodyguard detachment into one of the most heavily armed divisions in the Wehrmacht. They received the best equipment, the newest tanks, priority for reinforcements, and they repaid Hitler's favoritism with atrocities across 2 continents. In February 1943, after retaking Kharkov from the Soviets, Joachim Peiper's battalion earned the nickname Blowtorch Battalion. Ukrainian witnesses, including 14-year-old survivor Ivan Kiselev, described how Leibstandarte soldiers burned the villages of Yefremovka and Semyonovka, shooting or immolating the inhabitants. The division's most infamous crime came on December 17, 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge. Near the Belgian town of Malmedy, Kampfgruppe Peiper, an armored spearhead of 4,800 men, encountered a convoy of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. After a brief firefight, approximately 150 American soldiers surrendered. The prisoners were gathered in a farmer's field. Then the machine guns opened fire. Of the 84 men killed, 41 were executed with pistol shots to the head at close range. 6 had their skulls bashed in. Some survivors escaped by feigning death for hours while Germans walked among the bodies, shooting anyone who moved. The Malmedy massacre was just one of several. That same day, Peiper's men executed prisoners at Bullingen, Ligneville, Stavelot, and elsewhere. In Stavelot, they killed 100 Belgian civilians. News of the killings spread through Allied lines like wildfire. It hardened American resolve and ensured that many SS prisoners would never reach POW camps alive. Peiper was convicted of war crimes after the war and sentenced to death. The sentence was commuted. He served 11 years. In 1976, his house in France was firebombed. He died in the fire, revenge, many believed, for Malmedy, the British SAS ghosts in the desert. The Germans called him the Phantom Major. David Stirling was a 6'6" Scottish aristocrat who talked his way past military police, broke into the office of the Deputy Chief of Staff, and convinced the British Army to let him form the most unconventional unit of the war. The Special Air Service was born from failure. In November 1941, Stirling's first mission, a parachute drop to destroy German aircraft in Libya, was a disaster. High winds scattered his men across the desert. Only 22 of 55 returned to base. Most commanders would have disbanded the unit. Stirling came back with a better idea. Forget parachutes, forget large-scale assaults. The SAS would operate in 4-man teams, riding heavily armed jeeps fitted with Vickers K machine guns, striking deep behind enemy lines at night and vanishing before dawn. The results were devastating. In their first jeep-borne raid in June 1942, Stirling's men attacked 3 Axis airfields in a single night. They developed a technique of driving straight through enemy airfields, guns blazing, destroying aircraft on the ground before anyone could react. Over the next year, the SAS and their partners in the Long-Range Desert Group destroyed over 400 enemy aircraft, hundreds of vehicles, and dozens of fuel depots. The Germans were terrified. Rommel was forced to divert thousands of troops to guard rear area installations against a force that numbered, at its peak, only a few hundred men. Stirling was captured in January 1943 by the Italians, which delighted them and embarrassed the Germans. He made 4 escape attempts before being sent to Colditz Castle, where he remained until the war's end. But the SAS lived on. Under Paddy Mayne, a man who once destroyed an entire airfield single-handedly when his gun jammed, using his bare hands to rip instrument panels from cockpits, the unit expanded into multiple regiments. They operated in Italy, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany itself. The SAS proved that a small group of highly trained, ruthlessly determined men could achieve what entire divisions could not. Their motto, "Who dares wins," became a template for special operations forces worldwide. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, fighting two wars at once. When General John Dahlquist ordered a review of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team in November 1944, he was furious. The commanding officer gave him the only answer there was, "This is all that's left. The 442nd is the most decorated unit for its size and length of service in American military history." And it was composed almost entirely of men whose families were imprisoned in concentration camps at the time they volunteered. After Pearl Harbor, Japanese Americans were classified as enemy aliens. Over 100,000 were stripped of their homes and forced into internment camps. But when the War Department called for volunteers in 1943, more than 10,000 Nisei, second-generation Japanese Americans, stepped forward. Their motto was "Go for broke," Hawaiian gambling slang for betting everything on a single roll of the dice. They had everything to prove and nothing to lose. The 442nd arrived in Italy in June 1944 and immediately earned a reputation for ferocity. They fought through Rome, France, and into Germany. But their defining moment came in October 1944 in the Vosges Mountains of France. The 1st Battalion of the 141st Regiment, a Texas National Guard unit, had been surrounded by German forces. 275 men trapped, running out of food and ammunition. 2 rescue attempts had already failed. Dahlquist ordered the 442nd into the frozen forest. For 5 days, the Nisei soldiers fought through German positions in brutal close combat. Rain, mud, artillery. Every yard was contested. The 442nd's 100th Battalion, already legendary, already called the Purple Heart Battalion, had fielded 1,432 men a year earlier. After the rescue, they were down to 239. They saved 211 Texans. The cost was 800 casualties. By war's end, the 442nd had earned over 14,000 individual decorations, 9,486 Purple Hearts, 21 Medals of Honor, 52 Distinguished Service Crosses, and 8 Presidential Unit citations. The 4,000 men who originally formed the unit had to be replaced nearly 3.5 times, meaning roughly 14,000 men served in its ranks throughout the war. Many came home to find signs reading "No Japs Allowed" in the towns they'd bled to defend, "The Night Witches," "Death on Canvas Wings." German soldiers on the Eastern Front learned to dread a particular sound in the darkness, a soft whooshing like a witch's broom sweeping through the night sky. They called them Die Nachthexen, the Night Witches. The women of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment embraced the name. Major Marina Raskova, the Soviet Amelia Earhart, holder of multiple long-distance flight records, had lobbied Stalin personally to create female combat aviation units. In October 1941, with the Germans closing on Moscow, he agreed. 3 all-female regiments were formed. The 588th received the least experienced pilots and the worst aircraft. They became the most decorated. Their planes were Polikarpov PO-2 biplanes, crop dusters, really, made of plywood and canvas. Designed in 1928, maximum speed, 60 miles per hour when loaded with bombs. They carried no radios, no radar, no parachutes until 1944. They could only carry 2 bombs at a time. So the Night Witches flew 8 to 18 sorties per night. Their technique was terrifying in its simplicity. Approaching German positions, the pilot would cut the engine and glide silently toward the target. The only sound was the wind through the struts, that witch's broom whisper. Then the bombs dropped, the engine roared back to life, and the Po-2 vanished into the darkness before searchlights could find it. To evade anti-aircraft fire, they developed a decoy system. One plane would circle the searchlights while another attacked. Then they'd switch, repeat, all night long. The regiment flew over 24,000 combat missions and dropped more than 23,000 tons of bombs on Nazi targets. They destroyed 17 river crossings, 9 railways, 26 warehouses, 12 fuel depots, and 176 armored vehicles. 32 Night Witches were killed in action. 23 received the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military honor in the USSR. Nadezhda Popova once returned from a mission with 42 bullet holes in her plane, her map, and her helmet. She wasn't scratched. When the war ended, the Night Witches were excluded from the victory parade in Moscow. The reason? Their planes were too slow. The Gurkhas. If a man says he is not afraid of dying, he is either lying or he is a Gurkha. That quote is attributed to Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw. Anyone who fought alongside or against the Gurkhas in World War II would agree. The Gurkhas are Nepalese soldiers who have served in the British and Indian armies since 1815, when British forces fighting in Nepal were so impressed by their enemies' ferocity that they immediately began recruiting them. Their weapon of choice is the kukri, an 18-inch curved blade that has become synonymous with terror. In Burma, the Gurkhas faced the Japanese in some of the war's most brutal jungle fighting. The results were one-sided, but not the way the Japanese expected. Rifleman Lakhaman Gurung was defending a position with two comrades when Japanese forces attacked. When grenades landed in their trench, Gurung threw two back. The third exploded in his hand, destroying his right arm and blinding him in one eye. With his remaining hand, Gurung stuck his kukri in the ground and shouted at the 200 Japanese soldiers surrounding him, "Come and fight a Gurkha." Then he picked up his bolt-action rifle and fought for hours, working the bolt with one hand, killing every enemy who entered his trench. When relief arrived at dawn, 31 Japanese bodies lay around his position. He survived the war and was awarded the Victoria Cross. Rifleman Panbakta Gurung's actions in March 1945 were even more extraordinary. When his platoon was pinned down by Japanese fire on a Burmese hillside, he shot a sniper out of a tree, then charged uphill alone. He cleared 4 foxholes with grenades and bayonet. When he reached a machine gun bunker that had been killing his men, he was out of ammunition. So he threw in 2 smoke grenades, drew his kukri, and went in after them. He killed 2 defenders with the blade. The third he killed with a rock. The bunker was too cramped to swing the knife. The Japanese had a saying, better to face a tiger than a Gurkha in the dark. Over 250,000 Gurkhas served in World War II. They earned 30,000 casualties, nearly 9,000 killed. They fought in North Africa, Italy, Greece, Singapore, and Burma. Wherever they went, they brought the kukri and the reputation that preceded it. The U.S. Army Rangers lead the way. It was the most dangerous mission of D-Day. General Omar Bradley wasn't prone to exaggeration, but he wasn't exaggerating about Pointe du Hoc. The cliff rose 100 feet straight up from the Normandy beach, a sheer wall of rock topped by German bunkers, machine guns, and what Allied intelligence believed were 6 155mm artillery pieces capable of destroying both Utah and Omaha beaches. The mission was simple. 225 Rangers would land at the base of the cliff, scale it under fire using ropes, ladders, and grappling hooks, and destroy the guns before the main invasion force hit the beaches. They trained on the Isle of Wight under British commando instructors. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder, was told by one officer that the plan was suicidal. At 0630 on June 6, 1944, the Rangers went in anyway. Everything went wrong immediately. A navigation error put them 35 minutes behind schedule. 2 landing craft sank on the approach. When the surviving Rangers hit the beach, German defenders poured fire down on them. The ropes soaked with seawater were too heavy for the grappling rockets. They climbed anyway. Some used the rope ladders that did reach the top. Some climbed barehanded, jamming their fingers into cracks in the rock face while bullets snapped around them. By 0710, most of the survivors had reached the top and discovered the gun emplacements were empty. The Germans had moved the artillery inland. A Ranger patrol found 5 of the 6 guns 500 meters away and destroyed them with thermite grenades. The mission was complete. Then the Germans counterattacked. For 48 hours, Rudder's Rangers held Pointe du Hoc against repeated assaults. They were low on ammunition, cut off from relief. Many of them picked up German weapons from the dead and kept fighting. When relief finally arrived on June 8th, only 90 Rangers were still able to fight. Of the 225 who landed, 77 were dead, 152 wounded, and 38 missing, a 70% casualty rate. The 2nd Ranger Battalion was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation 14 Rangers received the Distinguished Service Cross. Colonel Rudder himself was wounded twice but never left his command post. The phrase, "Rangers lead the way," was born at Pointe du Hoc, and it remains the Ranger motto to this day. 8 units, 8 different nations, ideologies, and purposes. Some were feared for their skill, some for their fanaticism, some for their cruelty so extreme that even their own side was horrified. The Dirlewanger Brigade proved that when you give monsters uniforms, they're still monsters. The Penal Battalions showed what happens when soldiers have nothing left to lose. The Leibstandarte demonstrated that elite training and evil are not mutually exclusive. But the SAS, the 442nd, the Night Witches, the Gurkhas, and the Rangers showed something else. That ordinary people given extraordinary purpose can become the stuff of legend. The difference between hero and monster isn't courage. Both have that in abundance. The difference is what they choose to do with it. If you found this video valuable, subscribe and leave a comment telling us which unit you'd like to see explored in depth. And let us know, which of these units surprised you most?